Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us for this live Q&A webinar around endpoint security. My name is Dimitri Petropoulos. I head up the business development here at Global Micro. I'm very excited about the topic we'll cover today. We talk a lot about hackers targeting people and not computers, so it will be interesting to delve into how endpoint security actually helps with that and helps to protect users. Just before we actually begin, I wanted to mention that today's webinar will be available on demand. We are recording it, and we'd love to hear from you during today's session. So if you have any questions for the speakers, won't you please add them to the Q&A function in the Zoom control panel, not the chat, but the Q&A function. We have dedicated time for questions at the end of the session. And if we don't get to the questions, I mean, we will definitely be following up with everybody as well. So I think without further ado, let me introduce you to today's speakers. Our guest speaker today is someone with a most unique experience in national security and cyber terrorism. Eric O'Neill has been working as a FBI counterterrorism and counterintelligence operative, a national security attorney, and as a corporate security consultant. In February 2001, Eric helped capture the most notorious spy in the United States history, Robert Philip Hansen. And Eric's investigative skill and undercover work led to the arrest and ultimate conviction of a master spy. He's also the author of Grey Day, as we can see there in his background, his advertising, and was a subject for a Universal Studios feature film called Breach. So as an accomplished public speaker, security expert, and author, he now presents keynotes internationally about espionage, national security, cybersecurity, fraud, corporate diligence and defense, hacking, and as his bio says here very clearly, pursuing one's dreams and surviving Hollywood. So I'd love to hear about that. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Eric O'Neill. Eric, really great to have you with us.
It's wonderful to be here.
Good stuff. So to run the Q&A, we also have JJ Milner. He's a tech entrepreneur, managing director, and the founder of Global Micro nearly 30 years ago. He's also our chief security architect and has proven to be instrumental in helping our customers and partners understand the opportunities and risks of technology. So JJ, welcome, thank you, and I'll hand over the mic for you to run the Q&A with Eric.
Thanks, Dimitri. So Eric, you've got an amazing story to tell, the years in the FBI. I'm not sure if every South African knows, but Hansen was a mole inside the FBI for some 20 odd years. Maybe you could share your perspective on why someone who was a citizen, who was a celebrated member of the intelligence community would spy. What would motivate someone to be a spy?
Yeah, there are a number of reasons that someone chooses to spy or is forced into it. So the three main reasons that someone might turn into a spy, and here we're talking about a trusted insider, of course, are bribery. Someone offers you money and says, I can make you have a better life. I can help you pay off your mortgage. I can help you get out of debt. I can help you get that car you always wanted. And all you have to do is take this little thumb drive and plug it into one of the systems in your office, because that's how it happens now. The other is blackmail. And we're seeing this quite a bit now with cyber attacks, where someone is able to steal information right off of your laptop or off of your personal information. Sometimes it's photos that you wouldn't want someone to get out, and they're able to use that to turn you into a spy. And then finally, ideology. You think more like me, you dream more like me, you come from the same background, and so you should help me. You should serve that background that we have in common and help me against that evil corporate overlord you work with. That kind of stuff sometimes sells. Now, Hansen was an interesting case. Hansen decided he needed money and he was angry at the FBI. So a couple of things you need to become a spy. You need the opportunity to spy. You need to be able to have access to information that matters. If you don't have access to any information, you're not going to be a very good spy, because you're not going to be able to give anything of value to someone. You need to know how to get that information to those who are going to pay you for it. And you need some sort of triggering event. And so for Hansen, he was mad at the FBI because they didn't give him the job he wanted and they didn't promote him to where he thought he should be. He also needed money. He was living in New York City, which is a pretty expensive place to live, and he needed the cash. And so he decided to spy. And he sent a letter to the then Soviet consulate in New York City, offering his services without telling them who he was. And in that letter, it was his first act of espionage because he told a known an intelligence officer that we knew was an intelligence officer, but who thought that they were a clean spy, that we knew about him. And he also gave up 2 spies in the Soviet Union, our spies, who were then killed. So yeah, he was a pretty bad spy, and he offered his services, and sometimes that's how that works. And we call that in the FBI or in the intelligence community a volunteer, because they volunteer their services.
Right. And I mean, you talk about some of this in your book, Grey Day, about sort of how espionage has evolved. Are criminals using traditional espionage for cybersecurity, or is it still the man in the trench coat, like you see in the movies?
Right. Well, Great Day is essentially a fun spy story, but what I'm doing is explaining the evolution of espionage using the rubric of the Hansen investigation to show that. And espionage has completely evolved. Now, you still have trusted insiders. You still have moles in organizations who, for one of those 3 reasons, will break your organization from the inside. They're in the circle of trust. They're human beings who want something and they will steal in order to get it. But the majority of espionage now is using cyber attacks. And so what I like to say is there are no hackers. There are only spies. There it is, right there. The title of this question and answer section, right? There are no hackers, there are only spies. Why? Because hacking has become the necessary evolution of espionage. As we took information that used to be in remember the old way we used to share data? Paper? That's right. If we go back a generation or so, all of this data was in paper, in file cabinets, in these extensive files. And it's all in computers now. We've computerized our lives. We've made data the currency of our life. Everything is data. I mean, everything from those pictures that matter the most to you that are on your home laptop, to the intellectual property of your company, to your bank account. It's all numbers, it's all data, and protecting it is the goal of cybersecurity. So if that data is that critical, then the spies had to evolve. They got rid of the trench coats, they turned them in for computer science degrees, they sit in air-conditioned warehouses in different countries around the world. They work in concert using very sophisticated attacks and using traditional espionage techniques to attack a person. That is what spies do. So you have to not think of some hacker sitting at a keyboard in a basement, tapping away, and then hits one key and says, "I'm in," because that's like magic. What it actually is spies who are trained to understand people, to learn about people's weaknesses, and to understand how to exploit those weaknesses in order to get them to do what they want. And that is why we see the number 1 cyber attack is still a spear phishing email, because a spear phishing email uses all that traditional espionage, right? You send the email, you get the person to trust it. They think that they should trust it, or it comes from someone they trust, or it comes from an organization they trust, like their bank. And then they click on that link, and now you've let the attacker in.
So if you could tell people what they should do about this, right? I mean, how do they protect themselves from cyber attacks if they're going up against spies now, right? Educated spies with all the resources in the world. How does a general business protect themselves now against a cyber criminal?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things to do, but let's start with an example. Let's start with the example of ransomware attacks. Now, we're all really worried about ransomware. Where you are in South Africa in particular, you should be worried about ransomware. And just as a basis of this, all of these examples started with an email that was sent to a person who clicked on a link and installed malware. So if we just look in the last year, City Power, your electrical utility, was hit by a ransomware attack that encrypted databases, applications, network, took power down. And just a little later on, the city of Johannesburg suffered a cybersecurity breach where they demanded payment in Bitcoin. And they said, and the attackers said that if you don't pay us, we're going to upload all your data to the internet. And that's pretty troublesome, right? It turns out that 76% of South African organizations are reporting ransomware that takes them down for 2 to 5 days. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot of downtime. And remember that when you're hit by those attacks, it also means you're not going to be able to feel completely safe until you make sure you've scrubbed your systems. All of these began with an email attack, and the attackers are seeing South Africa as a soft target right now. So I'm saying all that to explain to you that you are vulnerable, and attackers are looking for the vulnerabilities. And if they can find them, they will continue to attack until you're able to stop this. So the number one thing you can do is don't wait to address security when you're in a pressure situation. I'm not saying it's too late, but right now we're all in a pressure situation. You don't want to compound the idea of being stuck at home during COVID and the concern about a pandemic that's spreading across the earth with a cyber attack. So you want to address the problem, the potential problem, before it becomes a problem. So that's why I like to say you start with a cybersecurity vulnerability assessment. You have to understand the world of what you're trying to protect, and you have to understand what your vulnerabilities are. And if you don't have a number of people on staff who are cyber spy hunters, you need some help. So you get that vulnerability assessment, which will tell you where your major flaws are, because the flaws in your system are what attackers are going to try to exploit. So you really have to think about future-proofing your business, right? And just so you know, the average cost to address a cyber attack is $3.62 million. Your vulnerability assessment is a fraction of it and can save you millions. So you have to consider that vulnerability assessment, because the next point is really important. You have to bake cybersecurity into your system. It has to be intrinsic to your system. You can't think of it as something you just bolt on after the fact. It's not like when you're at home and you download some program to your laptop and you figure, I'm safe now, right? An enterprise is very different. You have users all over the place using many different devices to connect. You have a whole completely different infrastructure. So cybersecurity has to be built into your system. That's why that assessment can really help, because you learn all of the ins and outs of your system. You learn your whole enterprise, and you learn a custom way to protect it. Otherwise, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And then just a couple other things. Something that's very, very important, because when I talk about email and passwords being the number 1 and 2 ways that cyber attacks are successful. And why? Because they continue to work. 23% of people will click on an email link, and they just will, because some of these things are so amazing. Some of the tricks that they use are just so on point. That's how they get a city like Johannesburg, or a power company, or 76% of businesses in South Africa, because the emails are clever. So you need technology to protect against it. A few years ago, 81% of successful breaches were just using cracked passwords. Why? Because if you look on the dark web, they're all there, usernames and passwords from all the past breaches. And just so you know, the World Economic Forum said that by next year, that's 2021, which is just a few months, the dark web will be the 3rd largest economy in the world. So if you're thinking about all that, then it's important to focus on the low-hanging fruit. You have to address the biggest problems before you go after all of the non-malware attacks and crazy vulnerabilities in 0 days. You at least have to make sure that you're not going to get spearphished. So if I leave you nothing else, it's very important to focus on the endpoint. So when I talk about an endpoint, this right here, my phone, is an endpoint. The laptop I'm using to speak to you virtually today, and the laptop you're using to watch this question and answer session, is an endpoint. Everything that your employees touch in order to access the data that is the currency of your lives is an endpoint. I like to say, move your security to the endpoint as close as you can to the person who will make the mistake, because that is the point of attack for spies. So you want your security to be focusing on where the spies will attack. And endpoint security, that detection and response, that is your spy hunter.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that you say that it'll be the third largest economy in the world in the dark web. It's become quite commoditized, right? There's a traded rate for a password, and you bid on these databases if you're in a criminal enterprise. And I think what COVID has shown a lot of businesses is that there is no more perimeter firewall, this walled garden where you could know you had a firewall and everyone inside was safe. Everybody is actually out there on the web, and there isn't an IT guy sort of watching what they're doing. So it's quite scary, and I think it's great advice to get the security as close to the people as possible.
And the dark web is troublesome because we do a lot of work going through the dark web, going onto those clearinghouses, going onto it's sort of like, if you've never seen it before, it's sort of the evil eBay. You bid on malware, and you can actually do everything from hire a cyber attacker. Notice how I don't like to say hacker, a cyber attacker who will build custom malware for you. You can buy ransomware kits and get into business as a ransomware attacker. And if you're curious, your starting salary can be around $100,000 just by buying some malware. If you have a college degree, you'll know how to use it. Of course, if you get caught, you go to prison for some time, but at least it's tax-free. There are a large number of different custom malware, and what I mean by that is malicious software that you can buy because it's developed by spies who are using it against organizations and government agencies. And then when they're done with it, they dump it there and sell it, because most of these people are either contractors to espionage agencies or they're criminals that are hired by espionage groups. And what they want to do is commoditize what they've built later. Everything gets dumped there anyway. Even things that have been stolen by the United States, stolen from the United States NSA and CIA, have made it onto the dark web for sale. If you've heard of the WannaCry ransomware attack that years ago shut down 350,000 computers around the world, hey, that was stolen from us. So you need to understand that the stuff is being commoditized and it's out there and it's going to be bought and used against you. So we have to take steps to protect ourselves against it. So no, you can't just put up a firewall and think you're going to be protected, because these attacks will bypass your firewall in a second. And that's why I talk about moving security to the devices that are the point of attack. JJ, one other thing that I should probably talk about, actually two other things are one, embrace the cloud. We've been so worried about the cloud because there are concerns in the past that, the cloud could be attacked. But I'll tell you what, most of the really good cloud companies and data storage companies and cybersecurity companies that leverage the cloud are far more protected than a small business that's using their services. And the cloud also allows you to update those endpoints immediately with the latest and best information to prevent attacks. And then finally, training. We got to talk about training. I mean, you don't want to leave your employees just completely blind. They need to know how to identify some of these attacks. You want to bring that 23%, 1 in 4 people about that are going to click on these links. You want to bring that average down a little bit. And the best way to do that is to train people. And part of that is also, what I call red team tests. And that's where the good guys are helping you, and they're sending emails to your employees that and they're collecting data on how many employees click and who might need a little bit better training. It should always be beneficial. It should never be punitive. But when someone clicks on the link and you just say, hey, you clicked on this, let me tell you why you shouldn't have and what you should look for. That is great training that will make people think like spy hunters, that will make people attack the threat before the threat attacks you, in order to save your businesses.
Yeah, we do a lot of cyber awareness engagements with customers, and we talk about the human firewall, right? Because we've all logged onto a website, and then you get that capture screen that asks you to prove that you're a human being and not a robot, and that's really testament to the fact that our brains have the ability to do some things that computers still aren't good at. I mean, they're getting better at it. And so just to increase that awareness, I think it's the most cost-effective solution that customers can do. You wouldn't walk in in a dark neighborhood alone in a foreign city. You'd be savvy to that, but somehow people are desensitized, I think, to the risks that are out there. Many of the customers, when we start talking to them, think about security in obscurity, right? Why would someone attack me? What have I got that's of value? What would you say to people who sort of assume that drive-by cybersecurity is not something that they should be concerned about, or should they be focusing really on targeted attacks?
I'll give you one more statistic. Criminal cyber attacks are pegged to cost businesses $6 trillion by next year. 6 trillion. It was like, it was in the millions in 2015. So to give you an idea of the prevalence of these attacks, the new bank robbers are cyber criminals. Nobody's breaking into a bank and holding it up and getting $10,000. They're coming after you, locking your systems with ransomware, screwing your backup up so that when you try to reinstall, you've got a already compromised backup, and ensuring that nobody can use your computer systems until they pay you pay them a ransom. And you're paying them a ransom into an anonymous wallet that is not going to be found by the authorities. And even if they're found by the authorities, they're sitting in some country with no extradition, and they're not going to ever sit trial. So you do have to be careful. You do have to be aware. What I like to say is, it's not how big you are. It's not what you have. It's not how important you are. It's not what incredible thing you're developing. It's not what sort of employees you have. It's only whether you're vulnerable. If you are vulnerable, you're going to be subject to a cyber attack, because they're out there looking for the most vulnerable organizations. They're looking for the organizations that are not just vulnerable, but who will pay. Did you know that here in the United States during the pandemic, the #1 vector of cyber attacks, the #1 vertical industry of cyber attacks is healthcare? They're attacking hospitals, they are attacking pharmaceutical companies, they're attacking anyone and anything that has something to do with the cure or therapeutics for coronavirus. Why? Because these are companies that can't afford to be down for a day, for an hour, for a week, and so they're paying. And that's who cyber attackers are going to have. Anyone who they can get, and they can get to pay, because you have to think about the criminal mind. They want to get paid. I mean, one, they're lazy. If they weren't lazy, they wouldn't be criminals. They'd have a real job. And two, they want to get paid. So they want to do as little work as possible to get as much money as fast as possible. And cyber attacks just get that for them right away.
And of course, they're companies that are service providers to criminal organizations. We hear of ransomware as a service. We dealt with a customer about 18 months ago, and we got hold of the help desk to engage to see if we could assist. And they sort of, they saw themselves as doing us a service because they pointed out the vulnerabilities. Obviously, they were just manipulative crooks. But they didn't write the software. This was an outsourced help desk that was there to facilitate a smooth transaction, which I thought was quite scary, that they could be so brazen that a company would facilitate this as a service.
Yeah, and that brings up something else that we need to worry about, what we call island hopping. Very often, if you have very good security, then and the attacker wants you, what they'll do is they'll look at who connects to you. What other companies connects to you? Who are your subcontractors that have some access to your network for some reason or another? They'll attack them and use them as a way to island hop from that island to you in order to get into your systems. It's happened in many huge high profile. We had a whole chain of companies here that were hit because they used a air conditioning service that had access to their stores, just so the contractor could turn the heat up and turn it off and have it at the perfect temperature when the customer showed up. And that's how the attackers were able to get in.
Yeah, as a security provider, we obviously have agents on our customers' machines. We have to think about this every single day. We have to make huge investments because, in theory, we could be seen as an attack vector. And we've had horror stories around the world where MSPs didn't look after their systems, and they were used to launch attacks. So that's something we take quite seriously, because you're right. They can move laterally. They find one point of weakness and they move in. we see payroll systems getting hit here quite often. There's a well-known product, I won't mention the name, but it's pretty much used by everyone in small business for payroll. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of resellers who resell the software, and they're really tax experts, right? They're not IT people, and they log on from their houses into these machines. And when we do the investigation to see how the cyber threat came in, it's through the payroll. And they weren't actually after the payroll data, they were after the fact that the administrator who had access to the payroll system was sort of out of band, out of the IT net, as it were. It's a server that was considered secure because it's payroll, but actually the person accessing that server was infected, and then the malware came through.
Right. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And remember, not Petya, right? That came after the WannaCry ransomware attacks. That vector attack used that same sort of payroll software, and that's how it spread. Everyone was using it in the target country that turns out Russia was after, the Ukraine, and it actually spread from there all over the world again. So yes, they're looking for ways. Like I said, these are spies. They're looking for ways to hide their attacks in circles where people trust. And that's what espionage is. I need to get you, a person, to trust me to do something that you otherwise wouldn't do because you know you shouldn't. And what I call that is a virtual trusted insider, because your account, your credentials, your username and password, your sense of self, your access within your company's network has just been compromised and you don't even know it. You're now my spy. You're my sleeper agent within your company. And that is what intelligence services are trying to do, but it's also what criminals are trying to do because they've learned from the spies.
Well, Eric, thank you. It's been incredibly insightful. Thank you for sharing your experience. I wanted to maybe hand over to Dimitri. Do we have any questions for Eric?
Sure. So the first one is a bit of a two-pronged question. It's about changing passwords. So how often, and because there's schools of thought around not changing your password too often. And the second part of that, if you could answer, was password management tools. Are they safe?
Yes. Okay, let me start with password management tools. They are. If you have to do your research, I don't like to talk about or say you should use this over that. Do your research, make sure that they have never been compromised. There are a couple big names that you'll find very prevalently that are very good to use. I am completely opposed to the password. I'm one of the cybersecurity futurists, and I think the future is now, who has said for years that we need to do away with the password. We need something else. We already have a patch for the password, if you want to call it that. It's called two-factor authentication. If you're not using a second factor way to authenticate your password, you're doomed. A password will not protect you. Passwords are easy to breach. They are lost in countless breaches. I guarantee that every single person on this webinar has an app that has been compromised and your username and password has been on sale at the dark web for months, days, probably years. If you're not changing your password routinely, then you're going to be breached that way. So it's actually more important to turn on two-factor authentication. And for anyone who doesn't know exactly what that is, there are many different forms, but the most basic is when you log into your password, you receive a text on your cell phone, for example, and then you get a number that comes directly to you. And then you also have to add in that number. That second factor can really protect you from some of the easiest cyber attacks. I think in the future, we're going to see a lot more biometrics instead of the password. I think that there are a number of very ingenious ways that are coming, but the password can be extremely troublesome. And yes, password managers are great because that password is almost uncrackable. And you do have to change your password occasionally. It's a bad idea to never change your password because, like I said, it's not you who will lose your password. It's whatever little app you've plugged your password into. And what we've seen by doing research into breaches is that most people use one password for everything. And that is a bad mistake. You want to use a different password for everywhere that you have to enter a password. And as we know, we enter our passwords so many places, and that's where password managing tool can really help you.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I mean, I was doing a count with a client just to demonstrate password management, and I had 325 sites that I have to log on to, or have logged onto, that I've got in the password management tool. It's just impossible to get our security scores up in that if I'm reusing passwords and that. So thanks for the answer.
Sure.
Another question we have is around when a cyber attacker embeds malware into your environment, what is the average time before they activate or do anything? So is it there for a period of time? Why? How? Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Sure. That is a great question and a hard one to answer, because the answer is, it depends. It's one of those answers. It depends on the attack. If it is a quick smash and grab attack, break in, gain access, take data, they're going to compromise one account. They've got your systems administrator. They want to steal this or that, and they're out. Then the dwell time might not be that long. But the majority of attacks, the dwell time is far longer, and it depends on what they're after. If you look at a massive ransomware attack, it can be months. So malware is injected, command control server is set up. Now the attacker has access to your system. They set up additional accounts because they're looking for that system administrator access. Now they have additional accounts, and they start moving laterally to compromise as many computers as possible in order to bring down everything at once with an encrypted ransomware attack and get you to pay a lot. This happens to cities all over the world. And I'm saying cities, not just companies, but whole cities. Just north of me in Baltimore, it happened. Just south of me in Atlanta, it happened. And it's happened all over, including in Johannesburg. So it depends. If they are stealing data, then often what the attacker will do is compromise you, steal the data, but of course leave those accounts behind and leave their ability to come back later and steal more, because they love repeat customers. So the important thing to keep in mind is that it's not about how long they'll be there, but that they will stay there until you are able to identify them and remediate the problem. That means that you need to have spy hunters. You need to have someone who can identify the attack, see where it went, identify all of the lateral movements that attacker made, and respond to that attack. And that's why I talk about endpoint, because the beauty of the endpoint is it allows you to see the attack when it lands and to see where the attacker tries to go so that you can neutralize them.
Thanks, Eric. The other question we have here is my phone more secure than my laptop?
Is your phone more secure? Some time ago we might have said yes, but no, it's not. So a lot of new vectors for attacks are directly attacking phones. And remember, while your phone is, depending on which phone you have, your phone is more of a isolated, closed environment than many laptops, where you can change operating systems, you can add different apps that might not be scrubbed or cleaned or certified. The same sort of attacks that will compromise computers are now on phones. And so what many attackers have done is they've taken the spear phishing email and they've turned them into text phishing emails. So you will get texts on your phone with links. And by the way, since we're in Zoom, one thing I might say, and it's not just Zoom, but any of the virtual conferencing, a good tip is don't click on a link that shows up in the chats, especially if anybody is taking college classes, unless it comes from someone who's on the panel. That's a good trick, because people will infiltrate Zoom webinars and chats, not this one. We know everybody in here. We have ways to know, but and they'll feed those links. So this is espionage. You have to think like a spy, and they're going to come after your phone too. And a big way of doing that is through text directly to you.
Right. I think the questions, I get a lot of stuff around detection and the cost of implementing tools that will do the endpoint detection or the intrusion detection. It seems almost a very difficult business case for the mid-market customers. So maybe on the enterprise side, or if the value of the data seems to be seems to be very high. I think the customers justify it, but besides multi-factor and maybe endpoint software to start locking down endpoints, what other suggestions would you have for a practical way of implementing intrusion detection and response?
Yeah, here's an easy one that can be turned on if you've got any basic endpoint solution. And by the way, endpoint is getting far more cost effective. I encourage you all to talk to our friends here at Global Micro Solutions, because they can tell you the different costs and they can work with you on this. Because of the cloud, because now a lot of these sensors can actually be on your computer, but talk to the cloud, the cost has come way down. But here's something else you can turn on: zero trust. I should have said this earlier. Zero trust is really important. Make sure that you are only allowing applications to run on your systems that have already been vetted and that you trust. That is a really low-hanging fruit way of making sure that a lot of the malware applications never have an opportunity to run. They're killed before they can even start. Because think of zero trust as that bouncer at the best bar in Hollywood, and nobody's getting in, even though they're all lined up and they all look wonderful, because they're not on the list. And if they're not on the list, they're not getting in. If that application hasn't already been approved by your IT or by your security, then it's never going to run. And that's one way to really get at the problem.
Okay. One more. It says, how effective is a Linux proxy server as a first firewall, and thereafter how effective is antivirus and malware software?
Well, I'll answer the antivirus and malware software question because we're running low on time. Antivirus is old. As we think of antivirus, that is no longer effective in protecting you. We're looking at cybersecurity, anti-malware, and endpoint detection as response as what you need in today's environment. The old days of viruses that were out there and you're going to protect yourself by putting up some sort of antivirus stiffer aren't going to work, because by the time we learn about vulnerabilities that maybe an antivirus might have stopped, it's already compromised you. Because by the time you update, it's already too late. And what you need is the endpoint detection and response, which gives you that complex AI that is looking for things that look like threats. And to give you an idea of what the best endpoint response does is it knows what your systems look like in a correct state and is constantly comparing to what's happening in real time. So that if it sees something that's totally wrong, it's saying, this is probably bad, let's block it. And then some person gets to say, no, this was good, or yeah, this is bad, we need to do further investigation.
Okay, thank you. JJ, you want to comment?
No, I was going to say, just wanted to thank Eric for his insights, and just to remind everybody on the webinar that because you attended the webinar, we will make our team available to perform these security assessments for you. There'll be no charge for the assessments, and everyone who completes an assessment will get a signed autographed copy of Eric's book. So we look forward to getting those out to you guys.
All right. Well, it's my pleasure to be here. I hope that I've helped inform some of you. And what I love to always say is go out there and be a spy hunter. Think like a spy hunter, because that's how you will stop so many of these cyber attacks.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you, everyone. If you haven't done so, please book for that complimentary assessment online. It was in the landing page of the invitation, where you can gladly speak to one of our Global Micro representatives. We do have some questions which I will take offline and respond to everyone. But we appreciate for your time, Eric, your time, JJ. Thank you very much. And for everyone attending, we always appreciate that as well. So thank you very much, Eric. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.